Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a couple of tags which Brian over at Bookish did on Tag Tuesday a couple of days ago, and they are thematically linked, although not originated by the same people. So the first one is called the Friends tag, which was created by Emily over at Novelle Novels, and the other one was the Enemies tag, created by Steve Donoghue. And when I saw the Friends tag I thought, oh no, this isn't going to be prompts relating to that all-white sitcom that dominated TV screens with the will they, won't they, and I was only on a break and all those sort of complete cliches. But fortunately it isn't. Both these tags take the first letter of, take the letter of the words friends and enemies and come up with a prompt from that. So starting with friends. So question one, F is for friendship. Name a book with a strong friendship in it. I'm going to go for Australian novelist Steve Tolt's second novel called Quicksand, which has a real failure of a human being, but it's his friend who always sort of props him up and keeps him out of the mire that he's always going to fall into. And it is a sort of a comedy novel, so I think the emotion only reaches a limited pitch, but I actually feel that with friends like that, who needs enemies? No, with friends like that, that it makes the guy who's always bailing him out of trouble, they become codependents. So it's not healthy for the friend who's always there to assist him. But it's a good novel. Steve Toltz is a very good writer. Real life, a non-fiction book that you want to read. Well, before you sort of hurl things at the screen. This is Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief by Jordan B. Peterson. Yes, that guy. But this was written a long time before he decided to, write stuff that would have us all frothing at the mouth and seething and stuff. This is a serious work about sort of storytelling and myth and stuff. I think it's Jungian, which means I probably will end up rejecting it because I'm not a fan of the collective unconsciousness. As I said before, I think all that reveals is not that we all think alike because there's some inherent humanity about all these myths that they keep recurring in different cultures. To me, it's because of the nature of our senses and our perceptions we draw from it. We actually have a limited palette, and we can only come up with a few myths that keep recurring because that's the only way our brains will let us dare to imagine. So yeah, whether I get to it next year or not, I don't know. Indie author, a book by an indie author. Well, I'm putting this out to BookTube. Can you recommend, I mean, I've read plenty of indie authors, but they tend to write genre work. Although I know Dane Cobain writes across many different genres, and I have read his book Driven. But I'm asking for an indie author who does what I do, which I suppose is write experimental literary fiction. As you know, I don't like either the concept of experimental or the concept of literary fiction, but I have to resort to those shorthands just to get across what I'm interested in. So if you know of other indie authors who write those sorts of books, please let me know, because I'd love to sort of read some and see where my fellow peers are in this sphere. And Brian asked whether I was an indie author, as he did of Britta Bowler. It depends what you mean. If you mean self-published, although I have a background with lots of books self-published, or do you mean a small independent publishing house, which applies to me, and I suspect probably applies to Britta as well. Then yes, my last book was published by Dead Ink Books, who are very much an independent publishing house to the extent there's only 1.5 staff there. And my next one is also by an independent publishing house called Lendale Press. So yeah, I'm definitely an indie author. Endings. A book where the ending made you scream. I'm pretty phlegmatic about endings. I don't scream because I expect all endings to be kind of rubbish, really. So I really can't think of... If a book is really good, then its ending lets me down, although it's not really letting me down. I don't scream, I just shrug my shoulders and go, yeah, another one. N, a new book that you can't wait to buy. I can't think of any, I'm afraid, because I'm never really aware of what's new and what's coming out, what's out next year. I would hope there's a new work by Laurent Binet. It's been a long time since his book, The Seventh Functional Language. Other than him, I don't know who else is due a book. D, dark, a book which has dark themes. Okay, so I recently read my first book by Ulrike Zern, who was a German surrealist writer, and that was called Dark Spring, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, that was quite dark, but so I was impressed enough that I've gone out and ordered another one of her books straight away. It hasn't arrived yet. It's called Trumpets of Jericho. Let me just read the blurb, or some of the blurb. Beginning in the relatively straightforward, if disturbing narrative of a young woman in a tower with a bat in her hair and ravens for company, engaged in a psychic war with the parasitic sun in her belly. The Trumpets of Jericho dissolves into a beautiful nightmare of hypnotic obsession and mythical language, stitched together with anagrams and private ruminations. Arguably Zern's most extreme experiment in prose, and never before translated into English, this novella dramatises the frontiers of the body, its defensive walls as well as its cavities and thresholds, animating a harrowing and painfully, twistedly honest depiction of motherhood as a breakdown in the distinction between self and other, transposed into the language of darkest fairy tales, which just sounds amazing. And also has particular resonance with me because my most successful stage play in the days when I used to write stage plays was called Walking with Mr. Brownstone. And it was a part for two actors, and it was the story of a mother in a crack house who was out of it most of the time, but she was pregnant, and the conceit was that the drugs had advanced the sort of awareness and consciousness and development of the kid. So most of the talking and the guiding is done by the kid to the mother, and we had the actress who played the kid spent the entire performance on one, sort of parallel bars in gymnastics. Well, they're quite high off the ground, so we built a lower one. So she was like sort of spinning around in the womb during, for most of the performance. And it was about exactly that, about the boundaries of the body of a mother, and yet having something other inside her that is not her, which is not a thing that men can ever experience. So so I explored all of that. So I can't wait for this book to arrive, and I'm definitely going to read it before the end of the year. And finally, share the love and tag some of your favourite channels. I'm throwing it open to anybody and everybody because I'm not sure how long this has been out for. And on to the enemies tag created by Steve Donoghue. Prompts. E is for enemies. How many enemies do you currently have? I don't really know. I keep myself very much to myself, and even before the pandemic I didn't go out much, didn't socialise much. I don't drink, so there are no sort of embarrassing alcohol related faux pas. So I don't know the answer to that, but I will say since I've been on BookTube and I've been reviewing books by contemporary British writers, I'm not talking about the giants like Alice Smith. Although I've liked all of her books anyway, but the sort of people probably the next level above where I am at the moment, and I haven't really liked them because I think British fiction at the moment is leaves a lot to be desired, other than recent immigrant British writers who I think are producing interesting stuff, but the bulk of what's been produced. And I do wonder if ever any of those reviews are watched by the authors. No one's ever commented that they've seen it, but I think that would make me an enemy in their eyes, because we all feel defensive about our books. If someone criticises a book, it's very hard to accept that. N is for new releases. Are there any November, or we're now in December, releases on your TBR? There aren't, but I do want to relay this tale. Doesn't really answer this question directly. So for non-fiction November, which has just finished, and I'll be putting out my video on it, I was casting around for a book that fit the prompt discovery, and I came across my favourite stand-up comedian called Stuart Lee, who also writes books on basically the craft, because he's a very literary comedian, by which I don't mean he throws in books, but just how he crafts words, and he does very similar to what an author is doing in terms of manipulating and playing the emotions of the reader, and in his case it's a live audience. Anyway, so I got myself in a real mess because I saw there was a new book of his coming out, and I clicked on it, and it was actually a book of, it was an anthology of, I think, stories from writers from Birmingham, where he is from originally, although he now lives in London. And for some reason, it was about the city of Birmingham, which is Britain's second city after London. And it's quite an it has quite an interesting history, very key in the Industrial Revolution. And I got myself in a real mess because I sort of literally clicked, or what I thought was clicking, and then realised that it was an anthology of which he had one piece in. And I thought, oh, this isn't really going to do the deal. And it was on Kindle. I got the Kindle version, or I thought I got the Kindle version. And it said, due to be released 5th of November. So it said, I got the email confirming the purchase. I didn't look at it that closely, but it said, we will send you an email on the date when you can download it. And that day came, and I hadn't received any email. I thought, I'll just go into Amazon and check my orders, which I did. And the first thing to say is it wasn't this book on Birmingham at all. I don't know quite how I'd messed it up so badly. It was a new book by Stuart Lee, for which I was very excited. And the second thing was, I noticed the date was the 5th of November 2024. So I'm not going to receive this book for 4 more years. And I'm absolutely amazed. How can a book be... I mean, I can understand if it's a mass book by... who's the dude who writes those courtroom dramas? Or Elena Ferrante or whatever. I can't understand if it's an author of that magnitude. This is Stuart Lee. It probably will only sell 1,500, books. How can it be 4 years ahead? It just makes no sense to me. I mean, I can only assume he hasn't even written it yet. But yeah, so that's the sort of weird and wonderful tale of a book that I'm not going to get for 4 years. E is for Enrage. What does it take for a complete stranger to enrage you? It's very hard to enrage me. I'm a believer in everyone's entitled to their opinion. I'm a believer in there's no limit to humankind's stupidity or irrationality or capacity for imagination to think, that the devil exists or that we've been prodded by, extraterrestrials or whatever people care. Or, I mean, it drives me to distraction, the sort of the anti-vaxxers during the current pandemic, I suppose. But I don't, I don't get enraged. I'm fairly, as I used the word before, phlegmatic or sanguine. People can attack how I look, how I talk, how I sound, how I write. It doesn't really get to me that much, because I know what I write, for example, isn't going to appeal to every reader. I mean, it's not a mass market type of book I write. And when my book was shortlisted for the 2018 Booker, on the one hand, it was great because because people wanted to read the 6 books on the shortlist. It meant my book was going to be read way more than it would have been otherwise. But it's going to be read by people who some people who you could be fairly certain weren't going to like it, and you just had to take those licks. So just give an example of my attitude. So the day it was announced that it was shortlisted, because they did it gradually. They did 1 book at a time, because the other 5 were by a sort of a popular vote, and they announced it was the judge's pick, and someone commented below the line saying, "Oh, usual postmodern shit, I expect." So they hadn't read it, obviously. It was literally reacting to the book just coming out, and I really wanted to type a response, but I didn't, because I've taught myself not to. But the response was, I didn't want to react to the word shit. I wanted to react to the word postmodern, like, how dare you accuse us of being postmodern? And that's my attitude. I'm pretty fortunate I'm able to laugh a lot of stuff that, if it ever got hurled at me personally, I'm able to laugh a lot of it off and agree with people. I have a very perverse attitude to literature, to politics, and and that shows in my writing. So if people hurl brickbats, I go, yeah, I can see why you say that. M is for Malice. What's a memorably evil character who sticks with you? Okay, well this is a bugbear of mine. There's no such thing as evil. You know, the good versus evil thing obviously allowed us 2,000 years of religion of externalising evil and then reusing it, you know, the devil, and then reusing it to persecute people like women as witches, or you know, people with mental conditions, or people with different, you know, skin pigmentation, and all this sort of stuff. And therefore, to me, evil has always been an excuse for our human bad behaviour. Any evil act is not externally motivated. It comes from the human or humans who did that act. And I refuse to allow myself, and I wish my fellow man would also act like this, to externalise evil, because it lets people off the hook for their bad behaviour. So there's unspeakable acts of violence and degradation, of course, but they're not evil. They are people who are wired differently, or have such an upbringing that you know that they have their grasp of the reality that we tend to share is very different. And I'm not excusing them. I'm not saying they should be allowed to roam at will through our society, not at all. But they're not evil, and their acts aren't evil. They're reprehensible, but they're reprehensible human behaviour. I is for the internet. Is there a person that regularly infuriates you? Well, after the British election in December, which followed hard on the heels of 2 years of utter craziness in our parliament on the back of the Brexit referendum, I consciously have stopped commenting on politics, which is one of the things I used to comment most on. Adverts, politics, football, and literature, of course, and music. They were the 5 things I always commented on Twitter. And I'm not on any other social media other than Goodreads. And I suppose LinkedIn, but that's a bit of an odd one because that's sort of tied into your professional life. So after the defeat of progressivism, which was helped by the choice of candidate to represent that progressivism, we've lost the battle here in Britain. You know, hopefully America can renew under a new president and sort of roll back some of the sort of the Trumpism, but I don't see any prospect of that in Britain, because to me the election in 2019 was a vote for self and self-interest, and I don't see how you could ever break back from that into a collective way of thinking of helping your lesser well-off person in society. I don't think most people who voted for the current government care about other people, and I don't see how, you know, with that turn of the ratchet, I don't see how you turn it back. You know, there was a lot of confusing fog of war about the election because of issues like Brexit and stuff like that. So it wasn't just a pure vote for self-interest, but ultimately it was, because one of the few things that the Progressive offered was you know, the defence of the National Health Service by, you know, preventing it being sold off and privatised and sold to American business interests after Brexit, and all these sorts of things. And of course the irony is, within 3 months you had the pandemic, and suddenly the NHS is the most cherished thing, having just been 3 months earlier rejected as being of any importance by the way the vote went. So, you know, I don't really comment anymore. Who knows, I may get my enthusiasm and my ire back, but I do feel the argument has been lost in this country, which makes me quite sad. Although the pandemic might shake things up, but, you know, in that respect, but we'll have to see. What I will say is, from Monday to Friday on Sky News, they have a half-hour slot from 9:30 onwards, 10:30, 11:30, then repeat at 12:30. What the papers say, you know, they get the papers coming in off the printing presses, and they review. Tends to be the front pages only, because they haven't got time to digest what's inside. And a lot of the and they had different panelists. They have a sort of a set rota each week, but you know, it's not the same two night after night after night. And invariably, they would infuriate me because this shows me everything that's wrong with journalism in the UK. Because they're all representing political positions. You know, they're not neutral journalists. They're not. You know, their reporting and their opinion forming is based on their politics. It's not based on the facts. On either side, left or right. And this is why I've never read a newspaper in my life since I left home. I've never had a newspaper because I just don't. I don't see the need of paying money over to hear some newspaper owner proprietor's political position. But I did used to respond to these panelists. And one or two of them responded back to me on Twitter afterwards. So they're obviously monitoring, because it's in real time. So literally, I had one guy come back at me within about 10 minutes of my tweet, 10 minutes after he'd got off doing the review. And one that really bemused me was one of the reasons to say the Progressives lost the election was the anti-Semitism accusations that racked the Labour Party, to the extent of the Commission for Racial Equality and Justice in this country actually found the Labour Party in breach of the laws that apply to racial inequality because of how they behaved over anti-Semitism. So it broke back in the news a couple of weeks ago because this report was released, made public, and Jeremy Corbyn, the ex-leader of Labour, who's basically the one who's sort of accused of overseeing this sort of anti-Semitism, if not directly contributing it, but sort of letting it flow amongst the membership, and the current leader, Keir Starmer, who's sworn to stamp it out of the party. And they had a correspondent on who happened to be Jewish, as am I, and she was from the left. She was from the progressive wing of journalism. Sorry, I should say the progressive wing of newspapers, not journalism, because it's not progressive journalism. And she made a statement which was extraordinary. She sort of said, millions of British Jews don't feel secure, under the auspices of the Labour Party. Now, at the last census, there was 250,000 Jews in the UK. So for a journalist to make that statement is just, it just backs up everything I feel about journalism. She can't even get the facts right. And, of those 250,000 Jews, I don't know how many of them are under the voting age. Let's say a quarter. So 200,000 Jews can vote. May not be as much as that, but for the sake of this thought experiment. Now, not all 200,000 of those Jews voted or would ever vote Labour. They'll vote Conservative. So, as I say, it just. And I did tweet my factual correction of her statement on that. She wasn't one of the journalists who came back to me. But this is what we're dealing with. And is it any wonder that people get their news from other sources when, as I say, I've never been a fan of print journalism, ever. And it seems to be sort of fast sinking into the mire. E is for Eradication. Is there a book you'd erase from existence, and if so, why? No, there absolutely isn't, because no matter how reprehensible a book, it still has the right to exist. I am a firm believer in freedom of expression in the arts. And why wouldn't I be? I'm an author. What happens if one of my books fell foul of public opinion and people felt that it should be banned or burned or a fatwa put on me? Absolutely not. S is for Seething. Is there a book that still enrages you years later? There is actually, but it's not that many years later. But it's two books within 2 years. One was 2017 and one was 2018 or 18 and 19. The older one is The Power by Naomi Alderman, which is the dumbest geopolitical book. I mean, I know it's not ostensibly a geopolitical book. It's a sci-fi book. But it's geopolitics. Just so wrong and just so awful that enraged me. I'll post the link to my review on it. It's a hate review, I'm afraid. And the other one is Sarah Moss's book. What was it called? Ghost Wall. Which enraged me because everybody seems to love it. And again, to me, it was just dumb, you know. It first of all couldn't decide whether it was going to talk about prehistoric Iron Age bogman myths or Roman myths. It seemed to fall between the two. It couldn't make up its mind. And then all the characters around the main character, who's a teenage girl, they all represent political positions or gender positions. But they're so black and white. They are not real people. They're cardboard cutouts. They're there to represent. You know, so her father is, you know, this sort of pro-Brexit, right-wing, you know, everything that I stand against. But I felt sorry for how he was portrayed because I didn't think that, you know, was credible in the least. And her put upon mother, you know. And I'm sure there are women, unfortunately, in relationships like this, but she was so submissive. It was, you know, just everything about that book was dumb. So, you know, there aren't many books I don't finish, and I did finish both of those. The books I tend to not to finish are because they're boring. But books when they're dumb, they're stupid, or the logic of them is stupid, then I do tend to finish them, and yes, they enrage me. And I'll post links to my reviews of both of those. So there you have it. Thanks to Steve, and thanks to Emily, and thanks to Brian. Although I wasn't directly tagged, I would have done it without seeing these on his page. So yeah, friends and enemies. Till next time.